kind of a hard day to get here, I think, dreary and wet. As I said in my email, I think this is a problem that we all have. I taught literature for many years, and not much to teach if they haven't read anything, so I can tell you about the author, but that's about it. So I think for all of our courses, the students coming prepared with having done the reading just makes all the difference in the world. And so I invited two young whippersnappers to talk about how they get people to read. Both of them teach courses that are heavily based in reading. Jared is a medievalist, and he teaches in the humanities program, and Anna is political scientist and teaches in that area. So they don't have anything to say if their students haven't read the material. So I thought they would be good people to give us advice on how to get people to read. So who's going first?
You want me to go first? Okay, I'm happy to go first. So do I sit down? Is that?
You can do
we have a chair
whatever you
there?
like. There's a chair if you want to.
I would prefer a seat.
I'm gonna sit next
Yeah.
to you, Jared.
So first of all, I'm aware of the fact that these are often assignments for young whippersnappers, so that we can become more intentional about our teaching. And so, of course, I sit here knowing that many of you are know much more about this than I do, and are much more experienced and practiced in getting students to read. But I thought it would be helpful to begin with just a story of my troubles. Going back to my first year at Lee, which was 2009, and I came to Lee as a sort of 1 year full-time adjunct, and this was at a time when the humanities core was sort of in a state of transition. At the time, Jeff Golden, who was one of my predecessors, and I worked alongside him for that first year, looked at my syllabus on the first week of class and said, good luck, and just kind of smiled at me. And of course the good luck meant you're never going to get them to read all of that. And of course he was right. I didn't get them to read much of it at all. And so, I talked to Jeff at the time, and I talked to Randy and some of the others who had worked in the humanities core. I know Chris worked in the humanities core up until around that time. And one of the real challenges in these classes, which are meant to be sort of interdisciplinary, and they're meant to sort of deal with monuments of the Western tradition, whether literary or philosophical or art historical, in the kind of Western civ, sort of historical chronological narrative. So you're doing sort of everything. And then along the way, you're asking students, here, read a couple hundred pages of epic literature. Oh, by the way, read this tragedy for tomorrow. Yes, all 69 pages in your English translation. And so some of this is just sort of assigning a lot of reading without the expectation that students are in fact doing it. Jeff's strategy at the time was, just to give up on the big monumental literary texts in their entirety, and say, well, we're going to go more of an anthology approach. We're going to read snippets, and I'll sort of talk about the literature, more lecture-based, and expecting less on the part of the students. And one of I think the challenges he was coming up against, and that I came up against in that first year, 2009, was just looking at the sort of spectrum of college readiness that we all face in the core. We have, on the one hand, students who are Centennial Scholars who could be anywhere. They could be attending Ivy League schools. I mean, they at least have the requisite skills in reading to do that if they had the opportunity. And then we have students who would have trouble getting admitted to other schools, and we've got everyone in between. And I, in fact, just this semester, I went ahead and looked at I don't typically look at test scores, but just out of curiosity, I looked at my ACT scores just to get a sense for the spread of college readiness according to the ACT. And in this semester, I have 103 students in my 2 sections of humanities core, and I have 8 students who have a 31 or higher on the ACT, so they're in the top 3%. And then I have 15 students who scored an 18 or below, which says they are below the level of sort of threshold college readiness, and in each of those students struggled in particular in the area of reading comprehension. And then I've got 30 students clustered between 22 and 25. Those are average scores, and then 26 students clustered in the sort of 26 to 30. And obviously, I'm not to 103 students yet, so I don't know what I did. I left some out. But in any case, this is the challenge, sort of reaching both ends of the spectrum. And one way of doing this is, of course, just target the middle, and then you tend to lose both the centennial scholars at the high end and then the struggling students at the low end who really struggle with basic literacy. And so my approach early on was just to try to make up for what was lacking in student preparedness in my own enthusiasm. Just sort of smile a lot and get really excited about the literature and do hand motions and, hold up. Isn't the Iliad exciting? and there maybe something would work. And I'm not sure whether it did. And one of the things that ended up really changing my thinking about how intentionally I should approach the reading in the core, I think, was in 2010, 2011 when Aaron Johnson and Mary McCampbell joined me on the humanities faculty. And their instincts were these should be heavily based in literary texts, these courses. They should not be a sort of show and tell of all the great monuments. Here, isn't this nice? Let's move on to the next thing. But rather, we should spend some time digging into the details of the literary text and situate those within a sort of cultural historical narrative. So literature in context was Aaron Johnson's take on this. And around this time, I was reading Academically Adrift, which we were talking about in the CTE around the same time by Aram and Roksa, the sociologist who, after subjecting students at lots of different schools to a battery of tests, concluded, in response to the question, how much are college students learning, concluded, not much. And in fact, they observed that in Ivy League schools, state schools, and even small private liberal arts schools, students exiting this sort of senior or sophomore year were not improving in basic skills of critical reasoning, writing, critical thinking in any appreciable way, except in the case of students who were taking classes that required of them at least 20 pages of reading per class session. And I may be misremembering their conclusions. These are the things I sort of jotted down at the time. I didn't go back to the source before today. But that made an impression on me, and I began to think, look, if we're going to be doing anything durable in the humanities core, this might be the most important thing we can do, is to sort of change student perceptions around reading and try to give them some skills that they can then carry over into other classes. And so it's around that time that I began to get a bit more intentional about what my goals were for having students read it all. And actually, it was today that I began to get more intentional about what my goals were about an hour ago. So in any case, we're anachronistically projecting this into the past. But a couple of things that I think I've been trying to do, at least for the last 5 years. And the first and the most important for me is to de-instrumentalize reading. I don't want my students reading to find an answer. I don't want them reading to get a grade, whether that's on a quiz assignment or on an exam or a grade in the course. I certainly don't want them to read in hopes that they're going to survive the class, like it's some ordeal, like, oh, if I can just wade through enough of the Iliad tonight, maybe I'll make it through class without getting embarrassed. So the idea of using, some literary text as a tool to avoid embarrassment or to get a grade, to me, I think that's really an odious idea. And so I've been trying to de-instrumentalize reading and rather focus on fostering an understanding of reading as formative, as a practice that shapes us in all kinds of ways. And so I want students to find pleasure in reading. I want them to read to build up the moral imagination, and to build skills in analytical and critical reasoning. And so one of the things I began to do 3 semesters ago, and you all have a handout which is just a collection of things that I end up handing out in my class in the opening. Yeah, I only have one handout left. Do we have? I had 15. Okay. So one of the things I ended up doing, and I regret even handing this to you, the problem is I saved it as a PDF, so all my typos are enshrined forever in this. But this is a handout I give out on the very first day of class, and I make a big deal out of it. I turn it into a devotion. This is actually the first day after the first day of class, so the first day after talking through the syllabus. And I begin with a devotion from Friedrich Nietzsche. From his work Daybreak, and I just thought I would read this to you. I come in all serious and act like I really care, and I do. And I read this aloud dramatically to them. I say, philology, and they have no idea what philology is, and I pretend they all do, and they not. But philology is that venerable art which demands of its practitioners one thing above all: to go aside, to become slow. It is a goldsmith's art, a connoisseurship of the word, which has nothing but delicate, cautious work to do, and achieves nothing, if it does not achieve it lento, slowly. But for precisely this reason, it is more necessary than ever today. By precisely this means does it entice and enchant us the most in the midst of an age of work, that is to say, of hurry, of indecent and perspiring haste, which wants to get everything done at once, including every old or new book. This art does not easily get anything done. It teaches to read well, that is to say, to read slowly, deeply, looking cautiously before and aft, with reservations, with doors left open, with delicate fingers and eyes. So I read this, and then I ask them to think about the ways in which we are all in an age of hurry, even more so today than the period in which Nietzsche is writing. And we talk about the ways in which our cell phones and our screens are distracting us from reading anything slowly or anything in a way that would express a kind of attentiveness to details. And so it's here in the first day that I begin to distinguish between two kinds of reading that I'm going to ask them to do over the course of the semester. Fast reading and slow reading. I admit at the beginning that we're not going to read everything as a kind of meditation on the text in the manner that Nietzsche is describing in this passage from Daybreak. We're not going to be doing all of our reading in the mode of worship, but some of our reading we're going to have to do very quickly, and I want them to develop strategies for that kind of reading as well. And so I describe this kind of reading as fast reading, and I in fact give them some exercises to help them begin to do this, namely by assigning about 100 pages in the Iliad right off the bat of the first 5 books. And I describe this kind of reading as an attempt to get a view from the mountaintop. You're not going to remember all the details, and I'm not concerned that you do remember all the details. In fact, I will be not just impressed, but kind of scared if you remember all of the hundreds of names, personal names and place names, and all of the detailed interactions described in the first 5 books of the Iliad. But what I'd rather have you do is get a sense for the view from the mountain. And then I want you to isolate passages in those first 100 pages that you think deserve a more careful reading. And then we're going to go back as a class and look at some of those in the mode of slow reading. And I describe slow reading as the kind of reading that we give to poetry, or the kind of reading that we give, to the face of someone we love, or to the way we even worship in the context of a worship service. And I say, we're going to do this even with the Iliad. We're going to read some passages very slowly. And so I think this is a way, I at least an attempt on my part, to de-instrumentalize reading and to get them to think of it not just as a valuable skill that they're going to use in lots of other classes, but as a way of sort of encountering lots of text, not just pieces of writing in the world around them. And then I do a number of other things throughout the course of the semester. For each major literary text that we read, I write a 1-page introduction. It's not the editor's introduction to the text. It's not a scholar who specializes in this work's introduction to the text. It's my introduction, and it's my attempt to connect what we're about to read back to my lectures and to other things we've read, and to also anticipate what some of the difficulties, what some of the particular difficulties related to reading this text might be, and to give them some suggestions and some tips for working around those. And one of the things I've discovered is that it's really helpful to admit to students when a reading is hard. This is a mistake I made early on, and I made it for several years, just sort of, again, smile and pretend it's easy, and thinking, well, if they see me struggle with a text, then they're not even going to try. So if I admit that I have a hard time staying up and finishing the reading I've assigned them in Homer's Iliad, there's no way they're even going to take a look at it. And one of the things that changed my thinking on this was in spring of 2013, I sort of listened in on one of these massive open online courses, a Harvard MOOC taught by Greg Naj, who's a classicist, a scholar of Homer, who's been teaching a class called The Hero in 24 Hours for the last 30 years, and it focuses primarily on Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. And one of the first things he does in that class, a class offered to Harvard undergraduates, sophomores, taught by one of the leading classicists in the world, is he starts by saying how hard it is. He says, wow, what a hard text. I've been reading this text for 30 years and I still don't understand it, and you guys are really smart, but you're going to have no idea what's going on. And he tells them just how difficult this is on the first day. So I think, to acknowledge to that student who has the 15 on the ACT and struggles with reading, that what we're about to do is hard. It's hard for me, and it's going to be hard for all of us in the class, and you may not be able to read as far and as fast as everyone else, but I want you to put in an hour or 2 hours or whatever you can afford and just hammer away at it, and I promise you you'll get better. So doing that on the first day, I think, is helpful. And then as we come to each major literary text in the class, admitting some of the particular difficulties involved with reading that kind of text, I think is in order. So I do that. I write the introductions, and then I give a range of assignments in the course of the semester, and I find really weird ways to incentivize these assignments. Very few of them are for grades. I don't give reading comprehension quizzes that often. I think giving reading comprehension quizzes, for me, maybe it's because my questions are badly worded, but giving reading comprehension quizzes tends to instrumentalize the reading, such that the students are thinking, all right, which details do I have to remember? I know how Wilford asks his questions. Which details do I have to remember so I can survive his quiz? And oftentimes it sends them to online resources to try to read about the text rather than read the text. So they're going into SparkNotes or they're doing Wikipedia and they're trying to get through my quiz. So I try not to do that, and I just say read it because it's awesome. And then, oh, by the way, I've got this really cool thing I want you to think about. And I act like it's something I just thought of that morning, when in fact I thought of it 5 years ago. But one of the ones I do with Beowulf, and I've actually included one of the assignments I give with the Iliad in this little packet of handouts, but in the interest of time, I'll show one of the ones I do with Beowulf. And I always act like this is just this morning. Last night, when I was supposed to be doing my Beowulf reading, I was staying up late with Stacy, my wife. The kids were to bed because we wouldn't want them to see this movie, but we were watching Unforgiven with Clint Eastwood, and there's this scene that really sort of spoke to me, and I think there might be a connection between this scene and Beowulf, and I could be wrong, but tell me what you think. Of course, this won't work at all if the screen doesn't come up in 5, 4, 3, 2. So here's what I do, and I play this. I have to fast forward because there are some choice words in this, but I play this one. Is it going to come up?
Is it connected to PC?
It's connected to PC.
You had it up before, right?
Was it up before? Well, okay. We'll listen. It helps to see Clint Eastwood's face in this scene. Anyway. Yeah. You can hear it.
It's a hell of a thing, killing a man. Take away all he's got, and all he's ever gonna have.
Yeah. Well, I guess they had it coming.
play the short scene where Clint Eastwood says, "We've all got it coming, kid." And they're reading Beowulf. And then I go back and I say, "Hey, and you know what? I was watching this Johnny Cash cover of
I'm
this
about
part."
to take
Uh-oh,
a
skip
very
that.
beginner's dose of extremely highly potent THC oil.
And I say, I was watching this Johnny Cash video where he was covering this Nine Inch Nails song, "Hurt." I don't know if you've seen this video, but it's awesome. You should watch it. I think it has something to do with Beowulf. I'm not sure, but I'm gonna, and then I play it for them, and they listen to this song. Anyway, I'm not gonna play it for you. Sorry, after already teasing you. So then I say, I think there's something going on here, and I'm not sure what it is. Now, the first time I did this assignment, I had this long handout, and I was telling them about the elegiac mood, and I was giving them quotes from Tolkien, and I was trying to lead them to, and then I realized, just don't do any of that. Just pretend that I've got this vague notion that there might be a connection between these three things, and say, I'll tell you what, if you give me a 700-word essay by Wednesday, exploring what Beowulf and this Nine Inch Nails cover and the clip from Unforgiven have in common, I'll give you 5 points on the next exam. And I shamelessly use extra credit that way, because they'll work for days on an extra credit assignment so they can get 5 points on the next exam rather than study an extra 10 minutes and save the 5 points. So that's how I incentivize some of these things, not by requiring them. A lot of my assignments are just like this, totally voluntary. And I find that, number one, I don't have to grade 103 of them, because not everyone will do them. And the ones that I do end up grading are really, really good. And the people who tend to do the assignments, when I look at this, they're on that high end and low end of the spectrum. It's the students who are nervous about their grade and they know they have to work really hard just to hang in there. And so this is precisely the kind of extra work they need to be doing in the class. And then the high end student who tends to zone out and get disinterested in the class because they've already done it before with their high school English teacher, and their high school English teacher was better than me anyway, so why should they care? Well, doing these assignments helps that student to stay engaged. So I find it's a way for me to kind of reach both ends of the spectrum while focusing in class time on the kind of 20 to 28 ACT range. Okay, well that's really all I have, and of course welcome questions, comments, suggestions more than anything.
Let's hear Anna, and then we'll have time for comments. I'm gonna make sure Anna gets her 2 cents worth in.
All right. So, I approach it very differently than Jared. Perhaps I am less virtuous, or perhaps I have a different path to instill virtue in my students. Ideally, I would love them to read for the sake of just loving it and thinking it is fantastic. When they're juniors and seniors, that happens. They found the value of it, right? So they appreciate critical thinking. They like the challenge of doing the reading and unpacking it and analyzing it, breaking it down to tiny little pieces and understanding it all. But it doesn't happen quite like that with freshmen and sophomore as I would like it to happen. So my first semester at Lee, I struggled a lot with getting them to read. What I used to do at the beginning of my first semester, I began with quizzes, which they would fail miserably, repetitively. It's like, oh my goodness, they're going to fail the scores because you're failing all the quizzes. And I'm thinking, are they not doing the readings? Like, what is going on here? And I'll have them do like class discussions, which wouldn't go well either because they kind of didn't get what they were supposed to get from the readings. So a little bit before halfway through the semester, I thought, this isn't working. I need to come up with something different because this is an utter disaster. So I switched things around and it's been working since then. And I like to believe that it is a path that instills virtue through repetition, right? So repetition produces internalization. And once you internalize a value as your own, then it becomes your own, but it all really begins with instrumentality, so, oh wow. Oh well. So this is what I try to do with them. So when I think of reading, I think of motivation, right? So how can I motivate my students to do their readings? And motivation, when I think of motivation, I think of 2 components, right? So 2 components for motivation are their thing needs to have a value for you. right? So it needs to serve you in a certain way. For our juniors and seniors, the value is the sheer virtue of doing it, and that text is delightful, and I want to just jump in it and read it, and I'm gonna be so happy. It happens, but not all the students are motivated by that. So I had to think of alternative ways to motivate them, and as a political scientist, I think about that as positive and negative inducement. That's what we do. It's our trademark. And I have also to think it's not just about motivating them, right? So it's not just about myself as a student, do I see an intrinsic value in doing this? Is this adding up to my life in any way, shape, or form? But it's also, can I actually do this? What is the point of me trying to do this if I don't even believe I'm able to do it? So on the one hand, I have to think, how can I help those students to be able to do it? By being able to do it as a part of it. And the second part is, what do I gain out of that? So for my freshman students, what I came up with that was summaries. I have required summaries for most of the readings in the syllabus. So this semester I have 42 readings, and I require 30 summaries per semester, and that is 25% of their grade, right? So I give them, 12 readings or so. When life sucks, your kid escaped, you were afflicted, you cannot think of the readings, I understand, right? So fair enough, you don't need to do a summary for every reading, but you have to do a summary for at least 30 readings out of the 42 that we have in this syllabus. Now, what is that? So that's 25% of their grade, and they could think, oh my goodness, this is gonna suck, I hate this assignment. And the way I try to sell it is, how is this a good thing for you? And these are actually the best 25 points you ever got in your life. So this is how I incentivize them. On the one hand, they need to be able, they can do it. And the thing with our readings, especially for freshmen in the core, and we teach American government, they're not super long, but they're really dense, right? So we don't really love textbooks. We like primary sources, and we like peer-reviewed journals. And peer-reviewed journals and primary sources for freshmen not always go super well, especially given the diversity of students that we have. So they're not super long readings, but the vocabulary is difficult. Sometimes if you're reading Tocqueville as a Frenchman, he thinks the other way around. From you guys' point of view, from my point of view, the correct way of thinking. From you guys' point of view, the other way around, right? So we invert the structure of the sentences. So, and if you're reading something written by a Frenchman, the sentences are long, they are in the other way around. If you're reading the Federalist Papers, there is a whole bunch of words that they have not ever read before, and sometimes they get stuck on it. And if it's a peer-reviewed journal, it's, ooh, okay, what's going on right here? So my first goal is to point them in the right direction, right? So for my American government students, what I did is that I went in Moodle and I created like assignments, like there's a place where they can like drop all of their assignments. And right before that, I just put a question. I say, in 200 words or less, do a summary of this reading and consider the following questions. And the questions are meant to lead them through the reading, because sometimes they're honest to God just clueless. Like they just cannot get what the reading is about, at which point they're like, why am I doing this reading? I don't even know what this is about. Why should I be doing? And then they go into that bad, evil pattern of, I'm not going to read this. I'm just going to pay attention to the lecture, and maybe I'll read this after, which they don't. So that's a problem. So the way I try to fix a problem of, can I actually do this, is here are some targeted questions to guide you through the reading, right? And in political science, we have specific goals. There are specific things that we want them to get out of the readings. They're not just supposed to get like anything. They're like specific things that I want them to get. So I point them towards that direction with those specific questions. So the summaries are not supposed to be super long because I don't want to make their lives really miserable. So it is like 200 words, but it is 200 words. It's not 199. It's not 198. They get an F if they fail to deliver 200 words, but they do deliver. So it's not supposed to be super long. It's supposed to be medium, and you can, I suppose, like one could adapt and do like 150 or 180 or whatever. So it's not, and they go and write through the reading and thinking of that question, right? If they already have something to think through and look for, I think it helps them to feel less clueless when they're doing the reading. So I thought that works. And the way I think of the questions is the way I'm going to structure my lecture. So all of those summaries, they are due right before class. They cannot turn in anything after class. That's a no, because I want them to come prepared. I don't want them to say, here's my summary that I did after lecture. It's not happening, right? I want all of them to read for class, so they're due right before class. And I got them to think about some specific items and questions and concepts that I directed them through the questions. And then in my lectures, I try to be very disciplined to make sure we're really addressing that question in a way that makes it easier for them. So I always break it down, like every single class we do the same thing, because I find that routine and repetition helps them to know what to expect and to look for and to be, oh, okay, this is where we're going now. Oh, I remember doing that in the reading, right? So I tell them, you've got to know the authors, like who's who, so that's a must. You cannot confuse them. Who is who, so authors, concepts for the core. And then the questions that I put for them in the homework are going to be about those concepts. And then in the classroom, we go over concepts in a very routine, deliberate way that feels comfortable for them. Definitions, I don't want you to just remember the concepts. I want to know what they mean. So in your summaries, you're going to write that with your own words, and then we're going to talk about that in class. And the last is connection, right? So how those concepts relate to one another. So I begin to build that foundation in the core. So they get to do their summaries, and it's 25% of their grade, but there is more. I ask them as well, I say, I want you to do your summary and turn it in before class, and I want you to bring a copy of your summary to the classroom. And when you go over it in the lecture, I want you to be correcting your own summary, because I didn't want to make my life miserable having to grade every single thing in detail. So the grade for that is a pass or fail, right? And I tell them up front, I tell those readings are difficult. I tell them this is hardcore, this is not a textbook, this is not someone telling you what to think, this is the real thing. You're reading stuff from the Founding Fathers, you're reading stuff from Tocqueville, this is really poli-sci people. It's gonna be hard, but I don't care that your summary is perfect. I care that your summary is your best attempt to engage in the reading. So as long as you give me your best attempt, you get a pass. So all you have to do is to do your summary, turn it in before class, check mark, you got credit for that. You do 30 in the semester, that's the easiest 25% part of your grade that you got ever in your life. Like there is no way in which you get easiest 25 points like ever. Plus, there are other benefits to that. It's not just that. It's not just the easiest 25 points of their lives. I say, I want you to bring your summaries to class. As we go over it together and I break it down again following that question on the board, I want you to correct your own summary. I want you to cross off things that were completely wrong that you learned in class. I want you to cross it off so that you're going to remember. The goal is, oh my goodness, I remember I got this wrong. I'm not ever going to write this again because this is being corrected. Everything that you do right, I want you to do, a check or a smiley face or stars or a rainbow or whatever gets you going. I want you to put a signal there that, yeah, yay, I got this. I'm getting something out of this class. I did the reading and this one thing, I got it. Right? And there is a sense of reward in that, right? So you got it, you got something right. So I'm going to keep on doing that, right? So you got it. So in that way, repetition helps to internalize the things that you're learning. And then another incentive, which is, if you actually do your summaries for most of the readings, what you're really doing is a study guide. You're doing a study guide. Before the exam, you don't have to reread every single thing. Before the exam, you have to go over the summaries that you've read the reading first, you wrote the summary, you came to class, you took notes in your summary, you fixed it. You know what is going to be asked pretty much in exams and stuff that we talk in class. And if you have your summaries for almost all of the readings, your life before the exam is going to be so much easier. So not only I am giving you the 25 easiest points of your life, I'm also helping you to create a study guide which is going to make your life better. I understand that's completely instrumental, but over time, through repetition, remember what is virtue? Like the repeated good behavior, like through that repetition over time, the feedback that I've got from the students thus far is that they appreciate it because they say, I hated doing this in the beginning, but I saw how helpful that was for me. I saw how helpful actually having to do the readings and having to write about them before class helped me focus on what I had to come prepared for class. And I think the questions really help in terms of I'm not just reading this and I'm completely clueless and lost. I also have as a required textbook a dictionary. And I tell them, you have no excuse. You have a dictionary in your app. There is this app, and I show them there is an app in your phone. It's called Dictionary. It's a real thing. It's a real app. It really exists. And you have Google, and you have the real thing Dictionary. So if you have a question about what a word means, that's where you go. So you have no excuse, and I encourage that repeatedly. Again, so one thing is like, I don't understand this concept. Okay, that's a fair question. I don't know what such and such word means. Like, really, kid? Really? Just check it out in the dictionary. You have no excuse. So all of this to help them create good reading habits, right? So it's, for my core course, it is structured, it is guided, it is a routine, it is a pattern because I want repetition and I want them to focus on the same things again and again. Right, and then I have my upper level classes. In my upper level classes, I do it slightly different. I make it a little bit harder. I still require a number of summaries every semester, but now they are not just summaries. We call them theory journals. In my upper classes, you're going to read, it's not that many readings either. It's like between 25 and 30 pages per class, 3 times a week. It's not that much, but they're really dense because they're really all like serious peer-reviewed journal stuff. So stats, it's case studies. I want them to get the methods. I want them to get the theory. For my IR core class, I have a specific goal in which is I'm beginning to train them to think as political scientists. And political scientists think in a specific way. In my discipline, we think of here's an outcome. I want to understand this outcome. What is the variation in the outcome? Here are alleged causes. What are the potential values that this alleged cause has? Either it was present or it was absent. And here is a series of steps that had to happen between the cause and the outcome. I want them to get that structure every single time. By the time they're done taking IR, I want them to see the world more or less as, you know, people do like the movie The Matrix and they would see the numbers and other things when they're like fully internalized. It's just I don't want them to see numbers. I want them to see causal diagrams everywhere they go. This is my goal with the course. And so the way I do that is by repetition again. So I have a specific, I give them the beginning of every semester a theory journal model, and I say, this is what I want. For every reading, I want it to tell me what the dependent variable is, what values a dependent variable can take, how is that variable operationalized, and the same thing for the independent variable. So I give them like, I want this out of the class, and I want you to literally draw a diagram of every single reading. And then again, there is an instrumental value of that, which is, if you can think of a reading in terms of a diagram, it's much easier for you to remember the whole thing than if you cannot diagram it and you have to remember part by part. If you can literally see the diagram, you're going to remember hundreds of readings and you're going to bring the map in your mind so much faster. And then I say, then again, this is also becoming a study guide. And then so besides all those specific things that I required for my discipline, I also have them do the summary. And it's tricky. So in the beginning, they fail miserably. They just fail miserably. But it's just how it is. They don't get the diagrams right. They mess up the variables. And it's okay. Because it's not like this has to be a perfect assignment. This is, I'm going to seriously try to do this assignment. And it's okay if we fail. So every single class, we go to the board and we say, okay, what have you guys got for your dependent variable? What is the variable? What are the values? How's this measured? What sort of indicators is the author using here? So we do that every time. We do the IV every time. We do the whole connecting thing every time. By the end of this semester, they're really good at it. By the time they're juniors and seniors, it came in very handy in their lives. And one of the things that made me the most proud, like ever, is that one of our students, she did an internship at the Council of Hemispheric Affairs, which is a think tank for U.S. foreign policy in Latin America. And she sends me an email in the middle of her internship saying, "Oh my goodness, those causal diagrams are really helping me because I'm not only writing op-eds for this think tank, I was soon promoted to be editor, and now I'm analyzing pieces that other contributors are writing. And because I'm thinking in terms of the causal diagrams, I can see that the logic of their argument is really faulty. So this doesn't make any sense that I can give them feedback and tell them how to fix things. Like, thank you." And it was like, "Ching, victory! Yay!" Like, that for me was a very gigantic accomplishment. It made me super happy. There is a reason I'm teaching you guys this. It's not because I'm annoying. It's because there is a value to be got out of this. And this is one of the practical implications of it. And I think like all of us for our disciplines, we know what is it that we want students to get. We know how it can be applicable to real life. And when they are younger, they might not see the value of critical thinking. They might not see the value of understanding about identifying assumptions and causal logic and evidence. But later on, those things are important. They are important skills for life. And if I have to have them do it a little bit coercively by putting it in the syllabus and instrumentalizing it a little bit until it becomes a virtuous habit, I will do so. Because my mom did that with vegetables and it really worked. So I'm thankful for that. Today it's a value in my life.
Well, my students write me as well, and they write from the drive-through window at Taco Bell, and they say, "Thank you for de-instrumentalizing reading. I'm able to contemplate truth and beauty all day long." And
Right there.
"Do you want the cinnamon crisp with that?" You know.
So,
Do
oh
what
well.
you can.
Different paths to virtue, I suppose. But I don't know, this is like my practical way of dealing with it. From what I got thus far, it has really worked. Even for the core course for American government, even though there is some gnashing of teeth in the beginning and some whining and complaining, which, I don't care. At the end, they do think, "Oh my goodness, now that I know how to think about those things, I feel I've learned so much." And so there is a way in which you can turn, that becomes like they appreciate it. And they see the value. And now they're understanding the readings better. And now they just got better at it. Of course they are going to get better at it. Repetition, right? So you're reversing back to the mean. So, yeah. It worked thus far. So... But then again, if anyone has...
I'm going to re-instrumentalize reading. I'm going to say, now listen, in order to survive Dr. Alves's class, you need to take reading seriously. And Humanities 201.
I'm a political scientist, right? So I can do that. I'm not sure about philosophers and people who care about beauty and the classics. It works for political science.
Well, I think one of the things that they pointed out that's really helpful and insightful is we have to teach reading. So it's not just assign it, but you have to give some sort of structure for doing the reading and for responding to it. So do you have questions or comments for them?
I have a question for Jared. How do you, when you get to your evaluative part, what are you evaluating in your course?
Yeah.
How are you evaluating?
I do have at least 2 to 3 graded essay assignments every semester, so it's not all extra credit and just do it because you love it. And then I give 3 exams, each of which has at least 60% of the exam as an essay. And so my essay questions tend to depend heavily on a careful reading of the assigned readings. It's not always the case. In Rise of Europe, there's a period in the middle where we don't really work with any profound literary text, little documents here and there. Here's a deed, here's a charter, here's a life of St. Francis. In which case the exam's more concerned with my lectures. But most of the essay exams will reward attentive reading of the literary texts, and I try to key those voluntary assignments to the essays on the exam. So another thing I can do to incentivize them is to say, if you do this, you'll get 5 points extra credit on the next exam, but you'll also do really well on the exam because this is preparing you to survive the essay or
Instrumental.
do well.
Right.
That's the other thing. I give really hard exams, so they need the extra credit in order to do the other things. So
I'm with you on the idea of instrumentalizing reading if possible, but
yeah.
I found when I just make comments about it, I always get on the evaluation. Dr. Coulter just makes random comments that have nothing to do with literature. And really, it's of course there's stories like yours about
Yeah.
that connect the narrative with something that they know. That they
Yeah,
presumably they know.
there's this sort of like if you connect the dots for them too much, like here's this
Yeah.
I want you to connect what you're reading to something in contemporary life or to some profound question you're asking, and if you do the connecting for them, sometimes they resent it, like it's patronizing.
Yeah.
But if you leave the connections too loose and leave the work to them, a lot of times it's like I don't get it. So trying to get it close enough to let them make the connection is something I really struggle with, and I don't know that all these little assignments I give them work. Some of them do, some of them probably don't. One of I'm remembering the med school. What was her name that you had from Vanderbilt like 5 years ago?
Can't remember what her name was.
She addressed us in the first session of the faculty seminar in the year, and a lot of these assignments go back to a kind of aha moment in that session where she talked about even in med school assigning 5 books to these med school students. This was like in a medical ethics class, and 2 of them I think pertained immediately to the content of the course, and 3 were just completely out of left field, and she chose them deliberately to be a stretch, and she just said, here, read these 5 books and tell me what they have in common. And sat back, and I was like, wait, I can do that? And so
That's amazing.
I do that on a much smaller scale quite a bit. Yeah. Which means you don't always get right answers, you don't always get good answers, but I think working at answers is important. So
Do you have a rubric for your required summary reading sheet? I know that you have the 200 words, but beyond that marker, do you have anything else?
I have the questions that I send them.
Right.
Right, and then for my theory journals, it's not gonna work. I can email it to you. I have like a little, it's not a rubric for grading, but I have like, these are the things that you should get from every reading.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have like spaces like for them to fill the blank here.
Sure,
What
sure.
is this thing? What is this other thing? Put in like 3 concepts that you learn in here and define them.
Sure.
So I have that. And
Sure.
so for me, I want them first to understand the reading, and then again, I think it's the nature of the discipline, right? So because those are theories that explain general outcomes. So a theory that explains war, or a theory that explains economic sanctions, or a theory that explains international cooperation. So what's going to happen is I want them to get the abstract idea of the theory, and so that's what the journals are doing. And then the exams are apply those theories that you learn to a specific case. So I go in the news the day when I'm doing the exams, I check the news and I think, what's going on here in this area? So I'll read like foreign affairs and foreign policy and check the websites and come up with an exam and say, explain this. And then there is the connection. But before, for my discipline, the connection between the theory and the real world can be made, I need to make sure that they get the theory right. So, and getting that theory right is being very intentional about that rubric thing. So I can email an example of what it looks
No,
like
I get
if
your
you so
idea.
desire. Yeah.
I really like the idea of admitting that it's hard. I hadn't really
Yeah.
thought through that, how helpful that would be for the students.
Well, it helps them to feel good after they get it too, right? Because you say it's really hard, and it's true, it is really hard. But if they can get at least part of it after the exam or after class, and you're like, oh, okay, I got this. I know this is. Oh, okay, I must be somehow smart because this is really hard that I get at least part of it.
yeah, one thing I think is important is never to admit when I don't like a text. To admit it's hard, I think, can be really helpful, but to say, can I admit now that I don't like the Song of Roland? I don't like the Song of Roland. I'm medieval. It always ranks among the great canons of in the canons of Western literature. Song of Roland's right there. One of the things from the Middle Ages that we read. I don't care, but I pretend to love the Song of Roland.
Oh.
So I never admit not liking a text or a reading or an assignment, but I will certainly admit to it being difficult. And many of them are difficult. They're difficult for me.
But don't you think it's possible to admit that you don't like something? I mean, like, I
Yeah.
don't see any problem with that personally.
Right.
I mean, just from the standpoint of, let's come to this and see why is this appreciated as great
Yeah.
literature, for example. There are things in Shakespeare that I find just amazing from a literary standpoint, but I don't like personally. It's not
right.
my own personal taste,
Yeah.
And I think it's okay to have differences in taste. We don't all have to be
No, I think
identical
that's
to one another
point
with what
taken.
we like and
Yeah.
dislike. But
Yeah.
anyway, I mean, that's.
And I
just a-
usually admit it after the fact.
Okay.
To be honest, I don't know. It's not my thing.
Yeah, that's probably
But try to give
strategically a
each
good
text
idea,
its best hearing. So I'm kind of a champion of it, at least on that at the outset.
Your story kind of reminds me of there was a famous English professor, I.A. Richards, in 1926, who wrote Practical Criticism, and he taught at Cambridge. And what he found out was he was teaching later what turned out to be geniuses, who themselves became Oxford dons. But he found out that when he was teaching literature, he assumed that they knew what it, being mainly cultured English kids, that they knew their own literature. And what he found out was that before the Romantics, that there was an urbane kind of sensibility that they just didn't get. And so when they read Alexander Pope, or when they read Dryden or somebody, that they just didn't get it. They didn't understand, and he had them write summaries of the poem, and they had no idea really what they were talking about. And it was a real revelation, and it kind of opened up English studies that you have to find out what they know, start with, and then you have to find a way to go back to teach the sensibility of reading, which is very hard to do.
And allowing the pretense that we all do get it to kind of govern oftentimes discourages reading, because everyone's sort of sitting there privately thinking, I don't get it, but everyone else does.
Right.
Or they're at least thinking, well, Wilford gets it. He's from East Tennessee. There's no hope for me. But yeah, I think admitting that there are some difficulties here and some work of translation that has to be done is important.
There's something about also the current generation, they don't want to look words up. I'm always saying about
No,
the
they're
app.
awful. Oh
I
my
say,
goodness.
you have the American Heritage College Dictionary. I always put on the syllabus recommended. I say, get the app. It's only $24. Best $24 you've ever spent. It's got every phrase, every word. And about the middle of the semester, I ask everybody, I say, okay, who's got the American Heritage College Dictionary? 0. Because it wasn't required. It was
It's
just
required.
recommended.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, why didn't you? I say, who knows what this word is? Very few will look the word up. I just don't get it.
I know they're really bad at it. Really bad. And for me, it's a constant telling them, almost every single class, go get your dictionary. Don't go do reading without your dictionary. If you don't know the meaning of a word, you have to check it out.
Yeah.
I've tried to, I don't know how to actually make them check it out, but if I figure it out, ever, I'll let you know.
Ask
'Cause
them
I'm
to read
thinking
it in
about
Latin first, and then they'll appreciate how easy it is to get the translation.
Or send it to a music video or something.
Yeah.
Well, our time is up, so thank you so much. I think this is really